If every country is in debt, who's the creditor? We've already explored that question. Central banks, bondholders, the system itself. But that only answers half the puzzle. Because if governments never fully repay, if debt simply rolls forward year after year, decade after decade, then someone still absorbs the cost. Debt doesn't evaporate. It doesn't hide in spreadsheets. It moves. So where does it go? Here's why that question matters now. In 2023, the United States added $1 trillion to its national debt in just 6 months. Japan's debt-to-GDP ratio passed 260%, the highest in recorded history. Across Europe, bond yields rose as inflation refused to break. And yet, nothing collapsed. No government defaulted. No currency failed. No creditors lined up demanding repayment. The debt simply continued. Here's what most people miss. When debt never gets repaid, it doesn't disappear. It transfers. The question isn't whether someone pays. The question is, who pays and how? This is forgotten economy, where money, power, and history collide. By the end of this video, you'll see exactly where that debt goes, and why the people absorbing it never recognize the mechanism. But first, we need to understand the illusion that makes it all possible. Governments borrow trillions. They service interest. They roll over maturing bonds with new bonds. To the casual observer, it looks sustainable. No catastrophe, no default, just management. But debt always extracts value from somewhere. It doesn't vanish into accounting ledgers or economic abstractions. It transfers, quietly, gradually, invisibly. Here's the first mechanism most people never see. When a government borrows more than it collects in taxes, it has two choices: cut spending or create money. Cutting spending is politically painful. Creating money is politically invisible. So central banks intervene. They buy government bonds. They expand the money supply. New currency enters circulation, not through production or trade, but through monetary policy. More dollars, more euros, more yen. Same amount of goods. Prices adjust. This is inflation, not as accident, but as design. The government repays its creditors in currency that buys less than it did when borrowed. Bondholders get their principal back, but the purchasing power has eroded. Savers holding cash watch their wealth dissolve at 2% per year, then 3%, then 5%. It's not dramatic, it's not sudden, but compounded over a decade, half the value disappears. This is the first transfer, from savers to borrowers. And most people never trace it back to the debt. But inflation is only the first layer. The second transfer is harder to see, and it happens every time you receive a paycheck. Here's where it gets more sophisticated. Your salary increases. You get a raise, 3%, maybe 4%. On paper, you're earning more. But your rent rose 6%. Groceries are up 8%. Childcare, 12%. Nominal wages climb, real wages stagnate. The gap between what you earn and what you can afford widens slowly enough that it feels like personal failure, not systemic design. But the pattern holds across decades. Productivity rises. Corporate profits rise. Asset prices rise. Wages rise slower than all of them. Why? Because inflation redistributes value upward, toward those who own assets, away from those who sell labor. When central banks expand the money supply to absorb government debt, the new money doesn't enter the economy evenly. It flows to financial markets first. Stock prices rise. Real estate appreciates. Bonds get purchased. By the time that money reaches wages, prices have already adjusted. This is the second transfer, from wage earners to asset holders. And it happens in every country running persistent deficits. But here's what most people miss. Even if you understand inflation and wage stagnation, there's a third group absorbing the cost. People who saved responsibly, planned carefully, and still lost. Now, consider someone who retired in 2000. They saved diligently. They planned for 20 years of retirement. Their pension offered fixed payments. stable, predictable income. But they didn't plan for 30 years of inflation. In 2000, their monthly pension covered rent, groceries, healthcare, and modest travel. In 2020, it covered rent and groceries. In 2025, it barely covers rent. The pension didn't shrink, the currency did. Here's what makes this particularly effective as a debt transfer mechanism. It's slow enough to feel like bad luck, not policy. Retirees don't protest monetary debasement. They adjust their budgets. They spend less. They move to cheaper housing. The cost diffuses across millions of people in amounts too small to trigger organized resistance. But compounded across a generation, the wealth transfer is enormous. This is the third transfer, from pensioners to governments managing debt. And there's one more group paying, the largest transfer of all. But they don't even know the bill exists yet. Here's the part that completes the picture. Someone born in 2010 inherits a system with $15 trillion in federal debt. By the time they enter the workforce in 2028, it's $40 trillion. They didn't vote for that spending. They didn't authorize those bonds. They didn't benefit from the infrastructure, the wars, the subsidies that created the obligation. But they'll service it through taxes, through inflation, through suppressed yields on savings they haven't even accumulated yet. Every dollar of debt issued today becomes a claim on future productivity. Productivity that hasn't been generated by people who haven't been born. This is the fourth transfer, from future generations to current governments. And it's the most invisible of all, because the people bearing the cost don't yet have a voice. So if the cost is this distributed, this invisible, this diffuse, why hasn't anyone stopped it? That's the question we need to answer next. Here's why this system continues. Because the benefits are concentrated and the costs are diffused. When a government spends $1 trillion on infrastructure, defense, or social programs, the recipients know exactly what they received: jobs, contracts, services. But when that trillion is financed through debt and slowly repaid through inflation, the cost spreads across 300 million people over 30 years. No individual can point to the exact moment they paid for it. Politicians operate in election cycles: 2 years, 4 years, 6 years. The debt burden operates in generational cycles: 20 years, 40 years, lifetimes. The incentives don't align. The first is visible, the second is nearly invisible. But there's another reason most people never connect the dots, and it's built into the language itself. Here's why resistance never organizes. Rising grocery prices feel like corporate greed. Falling savings yields feel like market conditions. Stagnant wages feel like personal failure. Growing national debt feels like an abstract number on a news ticker. The chain linking them is too long, the mechanism too technical, the language too specialized. Monetary policy, quantitative easing, yield curve control, inflation targeting. These aren't designed to confuse, but they do. And confusion prevents recognition. If you can't name the mechanism, you can't resist it. You might be thinking, if this has been happening for decades, why hasn't anyone stopped it? Here's why they didn't. This isn't new. Rome reduced the silver content of the denarius from 95% to 5% over 3 centuries. Every emperor inherited debt. Every emperor debased the currency to manage it. Soldiers were paid. Temples were built. Borders were defended. But the currency holders, merchants, savers, pensioners, watched their wealth erode in amounts too small to revolt against. Weimar Germany printed marks to service war reparations. The debt was denominated in gold, but paid in paper. Between 1921 and 1923, the mark lost 99.9% of its value. The government avoided default. Bondholders were repaid, in currency worth nothing. Every empire with debt found ways to transfer the burden. The methods change. The principle doesn't. But if you understand the mechanism now, one question remains. Why does anyone accept this bargain? The answer reveals the entire architecture. Today's system is more sophisticated. Central banks don't announce debasement. They announce inflation targets, 2% per year, stable and predictable. They don't print money. They expand balance sheets through asset purchases. They don't default. They extend maturities and suppress yields. The outcome is the same. Value transfers from currency holders to currency issuers. But the language makes it sound like prudent management, not wealth redistribution. And that's the point. Here's the bargain no one explicitly agreed to, but everyone accepts. Governments avoid sudden collapse. Currencies avoid hyperinflation. Economies avoid mass unemployment. In exchange, slow erosion instead of catastrophic failure. 2% inflation per year doesn't feel like a crisis, but over 30 years, it cuts purchasing power in half. Over 60 years, one lifetime, it reduces it by 70%. The system works because the alternative, immediate default, currency collapse, financial chaos, is worse. But better than collapse doesn't mean costless. It means the cost is distributed so widely, so gradually, that resistance never organizes. Now we can answer the question. We asked before, if every country is in debt, who's the creditor? We found the answer. Central banks, bondholders, the system itself. Now the question evolves. If the debt never gets fully repaid, who actually pays? The answer? Everyone holding the currency. Savers through inflation. Wage earners through stagnant purchasing power. Pensioners through fixed income meeting rising costs. Future generations through inherited obligations. The debt doesn't disappear, it diffuses, and the people who absorb it rarely recognize the mechanism connecting their grocery bill to a government bond auction 3,000 miles away. This isn't about morality. It's not about right or wrong. It's about understanding the architecture. Debt-based systems require transfer mechanisms. Those mechanisms require invisibility. If the cost were obvious, if every saver saw government debt servicing fee deducted from their account each month, the system wouldn't survive. So the cost arrives as inflation, as market forces, as the rising cost of living, not as you are absorbing government debt through monetary debasement. The system works because the cost is invisible, and it remains invisible because the system works. You asked, who pays when governments never repay? Now you know. It's not bondholders, it's not central banks, it's not foreign creditors. It's the people who trust the currency and never question where the value goes.